I never meant for any of this to happen. If you'd asked me a month ago, I would have sworn on everything I believe in that I'd never crossed that kind of line. My brother and I grew up together sharing everything, from secrets whispered in the dark to the unspoken rule that loyalty was sacred. And then his best friend walked back into our lives, and the ground shifted beneath me in ways I wasn't prepared for. His name was Carter. He wasn't new. I'd known him for years, but something about seeing him again after so much time felt different. He'd been away finishing college out of state, and now he was crashing with us for a few weeks before starting a new job in the city. I told myself it didn't matter, that he was just another guest in the house. But from the moment he walked through the door, carrying that easy smile and confidence that seemed to follow him everywhere, I knew I was already in trouble. My brother, Mason, welcomed him like nothing had changed. They fell right back into their rhythm, laughing over inside jokes that had been collecting dust, tossing footballs in the backyard like they were teenagers again. I watched from the porch, pretending not to care, but I couldn't stop my eyes from following Carter's every move. He'd filled out since I'd last seen him, his frame broader, his voice deeper, the boyish edges replaced with something sharper, something magnetic. It was wrong to notice. I reminded myself of that every single time my thoughts wander where they shouldn't. But temptation has a way of slipping past the cracks, and late at night when the house was quiet, I found myself thinking about him more than I should have. The first night he was here, I caught him in the kitchen. The clock had just passed midnight, and I couldn't sleep. I padded down the hall for a glass of water, only to find him already there, leaning against the counter with a half-empty mug of coffee. His eyes lifted when I walked in, and that smile spread across his face like it belonged there. "Guess I'm not the only one who can't sleep," he said. I forced a laugh, gripping the glass a little too tightly. "Yeah, I guess not." We talked in that dim light for longer than I expected. Nothing important. Movies we liked, stories about Mason from years ago, the usual small talk. But beneath it all there was an energy that neither of us acknowledged. I felt in the way his gaze lingered a second too long, in the way my chest tightened every time his voice dipped lower. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, that I was imagining the tension curling between us like smoke, but some part of me knew better. The days passed in a blur of little moments that only deepened the conflict gnawing at me. We'd sit together on the couch, shoulders brushing when Mason wasn't looking. He'd ask me questions that felt too personal, too deliberate, like he wanted to peel back the layers I usually kept hidden. Sometimes, when no one else was around, he'd touch my arm in passing, and I'd feel the ghost of that touch for hours afterward. It was maddening. I told myself I needed to put distance between us, but the more I tried, the more the universe seemed determined to throw us together. Mason would step out to take a call, leaving the two of us alone in the living room. He'd asked if I wanted to join him on a late-night drive, and I always said yes before I could think of an excuse. Every interaction was harmless on the surface, but underneath it all was the sharp edge of something dangerous. One evening, Mason fell asleep on the couch after a long day. Carter and I sat nearby, the television humming softly in the background. I should have gone to bed, should have walked away before anything happened. But I didn't. Instead, I stayed, my pulse quickening when Carter leaned closer, his voice low. "You've changed since I last saw you," he said. I tried to laugh it off. "Everyone changes." "Not like this," he replied, and the weight of his gaze made it impossible to breathe. I wanted to ask what he meant, but Mason stirred in his sleep, and the moment broke. I excused myself and fled to my room, heart racing, my thoughts in chaos. I lay awake for hours, trying to convince myself that nothing was happening, that I was reading too much into everything. But deep down, I already knew that was a lie. The house settled into silence that night, the kind of silence that makes every creak of the floorboard sound like a confession. I pulled the blankets up to my chin, tried to calm my restless thoughts. And then, just as I was about to drift off, I heard it, a soft knock at my door. For a moment I froze. My brother never came to my room this late. The knock came again, quieter this time, like a secret meant only for me. My chest tightened as I got up and opened the door. There he was, Carter, standing barefoot in the hallway, his expression unreadable in the dim glow of the nightlight. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. I should have said no. I should have closed the door and ended it right there, but my body betrayed me before my mind could catch up. I stepped aside, letting him in, and as he crossed the threshold into my room, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The moment Carter stepped into my room, the air shifted. It wasn't just the quiet of the house or the late hour. It was the way his presence filled the small space, pulling at something deep inside me. He closed the door behind him with deliberate care, as if even the sound of the latch might give us away. I stood near the edge of my bed, my pulse racing. What are you doing here? I whispered, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. He hesitated, running a hand through his hair, a nervous habit I'd seen him do 1,000 times. But this time, it didn't look casual. His eyes darted to mine, then away, then back again, like he was weighing the risk of every word. I couldn't sleep, he finally said. His voice was soft, low, as though admitting a secret. And I don't know, I just felt like being here. It wasn't much an explanation, but the honesty in his tone made my chest ache. I should have told him to leave. I should have thought of Mason asleep down the hall. Instead, I stepped back, giving him room to move closer. He sat on the edge of my bed, the mattress dipping beneath his weight. I stayed standing for a moment, watching him, trying to decide if I was brave enough or foolish enough to let this happen. But when his eyes lifted to mine, there was no denying it. Something had already begun, something neither of us could take back. I sat beside him, the distance between us shrinking until I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. The silence stretched out, thick and fragile, and I knew if I spoke, the spell would shatter. So I said nothing. I just sat there waiting, hoping, terrified. Then his hand brushed against mine. Not a bold move, not something obvious, just the faintest touch, the kind you might pretend was accidental. But it wasn't. I felt in the way his fingers lingered, testing the waters, waiting for me to pull away. I didn't. Instead, I let my hand stay where it was, trembling beneath the weight of the moment. My breath hitched, and when I dared to look at him, I found his eyes already on me. "You feel it too, don't you?" he murmured. The question settled in the air like a confession. I wanted to deny it, to protect myself from the truth, but the words caught in my throat. He leaned closer, close enough that I could see the tension in his jaw, the uncertainty flickering in his eyes. And before I could think better of it, I whispered, "Yes." That was all it took. His lips met mine with a hesitance that spoke of restraint, but the restraint didn't last. The kiss deepened, pulling me into something I'd only let myself imagine in sleepless nights. My mind screamed that this was wrong, that I was betraying Mason, betraying every rule I'd ever lived by. But my heart, my body, every fragile part of me clung to the moment as if it was the only thing that mattered. We pulled apart just long enough to breathe, our foreheads resting together. "This is insane," I whispered, though my voice betrayed the truth. I didn't want it to stop. "I know," Carter breathed, "but I can't stay away from you." The words sent a shiver through me, equal parts joy and dread. I knew what we were doing was dangerous, but the way he looked at me made it impossible to care. For the first time, I felt truly seen, as though someone had peeled away every layer I kept hidden and decided I was worth holding on to. Minutes passed like hours, every glance, every touch pulling me deeper into something I couldn't name. We talked in fragments, half-finished sentences spoken in hushed tones. He told me he'd tried to ignore the way he felt, that he convinced himself it was just a passing thought. But being here in this house, so close, it was too much. I confessed my own turmoil, how I'd wrestled with guilt, how I'd told myself over and over that I couldn't feel this way about him. Yet here we were, breaking every boundary. At some point, he shifted closer, lying back against the pillows, his arm brushing mine, as if inviting me to follow. I hesitated, heart pounding, before lowering myself beside him. The room was quiet except the sound of our breathing, the steady rhythm of two people trying not to fall apart. Lying there in the dark, I felt his hand slip into mine, our fingers threading together like it was the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was enough to send waves of warmth coursing through me. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. I wanted the night to last forever. I wanted to freeze time, to keep us suspended in that fragile space where nothing else mattered. But reality has a way of seeping in, no matter how tightly you cling to denial. Eventually, exhaustion tugged at my eyelids. I drifted into sleep with Carter's hand still holding mine, my heart both heavy and light. When I woke, the sun was just beginning to creep through the blinds. For a moment, I didn't move. I let myself imagine that everything was simple, that the world outside this room didn't exist. But when I finally opened my eyes fully, the space beside me was empty. The sheets were cold, the imprint of his body already fading. My chest ached as I sat up, searching the room as if he might still be there. But he wasn't. He'd slipped away without a word, leaving me alone with nothing but questions. Had it meant as much to him as it did to me? Or had it been a mistake he was already trying to erase? The silence of the morning offered no answers. All I knew was that something had changed, something I couldn't undo, and as much as I wanted to believe it was the beginning of something real, a shadow of doubt whispered that it might also be the beginning of an end I wasn't ready to face. The morning after should have been like any other, but it wasn't. Everything felt sharper, heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding a secret I couldn't bear to name. I moved through the kitchen in silence, pretending I hadn't spent half the night tangled up in thoughts I couldn't confess. Mason sat at the table scrolling through his phone, Carter standing at the counter pouring coffee. Neither of them looked unusual, but to me, every movement carried meaning. Carter's eyes flicked to mine when I walked in, quick and fleeting, then just as quickly away. He didn't say anything, didn't acknowledge what had happened, and that silence cut deeper than any words could. I took my seat, trying not to let my hands shake, trying not to stare. Mason, oblivious, grinned. "Morning, man. You're up early for once." "Couldn't sleep?" I muttered, forcing a smile. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. The three of us fell into easy conversation, at least easy for Mason. I spoke when I had to, Carter keeping his words short and careful, and Mason filled in all the space between us. To anyone else, it would have seemed normal, but I felt the distance growing with every passing second. Later that day, Mason left to run errands, tossing his keys in the air as he called over his shoulder, "Don't burn the place down while I'm gone." The door slammed shut, and suddenly it was just the two of us. The silence was unbearable. Carter leaned against the counter, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the floor. I hovered in the doorway, unsure whether to speak or leave. Finally, I forced the words out. "About last night." My voice cracked, and I hated myself for it. He looked up, his expression unreadable. It was a mistake. The words landed like a punch, knocking the air out of me. I stared at him, waiting for him to take it back, to soften it, to give me anything but the cold finality in his tone. But he didn't. "A mistake?" I repeated, my chest tightening. His jaw clenched. "We shouldn't have let it happen. Mason, he's my best friend. You're his brother. Do you know what this would do to him if he found out?" I wanted to argue, to tell him it wasn't just some meaningless lapse in judgment, that it had meant something to me. But the words stuck. The truth was I did know what it would do to Mason. I pictured the look on his face if he ever discovered the truth, and the guilt nearly swallowed me whole. Still, the thought of dismissing it all as a mistake hurt worse. "So that's it?" I asked. "We just pretend nothing happened?" His eyes softened for a fraction of a second, enough for me to see the conflict simmering beneath his calm exterior. "I don't know what else we can do." The conversation ended there, leaving me hollow. For the rest of the afternoon, we avoided each other, each of us orbiting the house like strangers who shared nothing but silence. Mason returned later, cheerful and oblivious, and I forced myself to laugh at his jokes, to act like everything was fine. But inside, I was unraveling. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and replayed every second of Carter's touch, every whispered word. I couldn't reconcile the warmth of that moment with the coldness of his rejection. It was as though I glimpsed a future I couldn't have, a happiness I wasn't allowed to claim. The days that followed blurred together, a routine painted with tension. Mason remained unaware, laughing with Carter, planning outings, treating him like a brother. And me? I felt like a ghost in my own home, carrying a secret too heavy to bear. One evening, Mason invited Carter and me to a movie marathon. We piled onto the couch, Mason in the middle, a bowl of popcorn balanced on his lap. On the surface, it was harmless. Three guys watching old action flicks, but the proximity was torture. My arm brushed Carter's once, and it felt like fire. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge it, but the weight of that silence pressed down on me until I thought I might suffocate. When Mason finally dozed off halfway through the second film, Carter glanced at me, his expression unreadable in the flickering light of the television. For a heartbeat, it was like the world fell away, leaving only the two of us suspended in that fragile space. "Why do you keep looking at me like that?" I whispered, barely audible. He swallowed hard, shifting slightly but not pulling away. "Because I can't stop." The honesty in his voice cracked something open inside me. We sat there, unmoving, the distance between us both impossible and non-existent. My heart hammered against my ribs, and every fiber of my being screamed for me to close the gap, to ignore the consequences, to take what I wanted. But Mason stirred in his sleep, mumbling something incoherent, and the spell shattered. Carter stood abruptly, muttering something about getting water, and disappeared into the kitchen. I sat frozen, staring at the glow of the TV, my throat tight. Later that night, when the house had gone quiet, I found him leaning against the back porch railing, staring out into the darkness. The moonlight painted him in silver, his shoulders heavy with something unspoken. "You keep running from this," I said quietly. He didn't turn to look at me. "Because if I don't, I'll ruin everything. And if you keep running, you'll ruin me." I whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop them. That finally made him turn. His eyes met mine, raw and conflicted. "Do you think I don't want this? Do you think I don't lie awake every night fighting it?" His voice cracked, and for the first time, the mask slipped. "I want you, more than I should. But Mason, he doesn't deserve to be betrayed like this." Hearing him admit it should have brought relief, but instead it deepened the ache in my chest. Because he was right. Every stolen glance, every unspoken word, was a knife aimed at my brother's back. And yet, standing there in the moonlight, the distance between us felt unbearable. I stepped closer, not enough to touch, but enough to feel the pull between us. "So what do we do?" I asked, desperate for an answer, for any direction that didn't lead to destruction. He shook his head slowly. "I don't know." The night swallowed our words, leaving only the quiet hum of betrayal hanging in the air. I went to bed with his voice echoing in my mind, the weight of a confession pressing down on me. For the first time, I understood that this wasn't just a passing storm. It was a fault line, and sooner or later, something was going to break. The tension couldn't last forever. Deep down, I'd always known that. Secrets have a way of clawing their way into the light, no matter how carefully you bury them. Still, I wasn't prepared for how quickly everything unraveled. It happened one evening, when Mason decided to surprise us with a late-night pizza run. Carter and I stayed behind, the living room bathed in the glow of a single lamp. We hadn't planned anything, hadn't even spoken much that day, but the distance between us had grown unbearable. We sat across from each other, the silence thick, with everything we'd left unsaid. Finally, Carter exhaled, his shoulders sagging. "I can't keep doing this," he whispered. My throat tightened. "Doing what?" "Pretending like I don't want you every second I'm around you." His voice cracked, the honesty raw. I moved before I could stop myself, closing the distance between us. Our lips met in a kiss that was desperate, unrestrained, fueled by every moment of longing we'd tried to suppress. It was reckless, a fire ignited in a room soaked with gasoline. And that's when the front door opened. Mason's voice carried through the hall, casual and light. "I got pepperoni and—" He froze when he stepped into the room, the words dying in his throat. The pizza box slipped from his hands, hitting the floor with a dull thud. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Carter jerked away from me as if burned, his face pale, eyes wide. I turned toward Mason, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. His expression was one I'll never forget. Shock first, then confusion, then betrayal settling in like a shadow across his features. Are you serious? Mason's voice was quiet, but every word cut deep. I opened my mouth, searching for something, anything that could explain. But what explanation could there possibly be? Mason, it's not what you think. Carter started, but Mason's sharp laugh cut him off. Not what I think. Mason's gaze darted between us. His jaw clenched. I just walked in on you, too. How else am I supposed to take it? Guilt surged through me, hot and suffocating. I didn't mean for this to happen. I whispered, my voice barely audible. Mason's eyes finally landed on me, and the hurt in them was unbearable. You? Out of everyone, you? He shook his head, backing away as if distance might lessen the sting. Carter tried to step toward him, but Mason held up a hand. Don't. Just don't. The room felt like it was collapsing, every wall pressing in. I wanted to reach out, to beg him to understand, but I knew how it looked. To him, it was betrayal in its purest form. Not just from me, his brother, but from his best friend, the person he trusted most. Mason, please, I said desperate. It wasn't planned. It just happened. His laugh was hollow. You think that makes it better? Carter finally spoke, his voice strained. I care about him, Mason. This isn't just some fling. That only made it worse. Mason's eyes burned with anger, his hands balling into fists. So not only did you betray me, but you're telling me it means something? That's supposed to make me feel better? The silence that followed was unbearable. Finally, Mason shook his head, his voice breaking. I can't even look at either of you right now. He grabbed his jacket and stormed out, the slam of the door reverberating through the house. I sank onto the couch, my chest aching. The sound of his car pulling away was like a final blow, and I felt tears burning at the corners of my eyes. Carter sat beside me, his hands pressed against his face. I ruined everything, he muttered. No, I whispered. We both did. The weight of our choices pressed down on us, the silence stretching until it felt like we might drown in it. Finally, Carter dropped his hands and looked at me, his eyes filled with sorrow. I can't stay here. Not after this. The words hit harder than I expected. You're leaving? I have to, he said, his voice thick. Mason will never forgive me. And maybe he'll never forgive you either. If I stay, it'll only make things worse. My chest tightened, torn between wanting to beg him to stay and knowing he was right. Everything we had built, every moment stolen in the dark, had led us here to ruin. He reached out, his hand brushing mine. I meant what I said. I want you more than I've ever wanted anything. But right now, wanting you means losing everything else. And I don't know if I can live with that. The honesty in his voice shattered me. I wanted to fight for him, to insist that love should be worth the cost. But the image of Mason's face, shattered, betrayed, haunted me. So I nodded, though my heart broke with emotion. Do what you have to. He leaned in, pressing one last kiss to my forehead, soft and lingering, filled with everything we couldn't say. And then he stood, walking out of my room, out of my life. I lay awake that night, the house colder and emptier than it had ever been. Mason didn't come home until morning, and when he did, he avoided me completely. The distance between us was worse than any argument. We weren't just brothers anymore. We were strangers bound by blood, but divided by betrayal. Days turned into weeks, the silence stretching on. Carter left town, and Mason and I spoke only when we had to. I wanted to believe time would heal us, that the bond of family could withstand even this. But deep down, I knew scars had already formed, invisible but permanent. Sometimes, late at night, I replay that moment when Carter knocked on my door at 2 a.m. I wonder if things could have been different if I'd said no, if I'd closed the door and protected what mattered most. But wondering doesn't change the past. What I know is this. Love and betrayal are two sides of the same coin, and sometimes a person who changes everything isn't the one you get to keep.